A desperate widow stood over a freshly dug grave, begging to be left alone with her dying child. But when the Comanche scout seized the shovel from her trembling hands, what happened next would shatter everything the frontier town believed about mercy, about enemies, and about the thin line between hatred and hope. Texas Territory, autumn of 1867. The sun hung low over the Llano Estacado, painting the endless grasslands in shades of copper and gold, a deceptive beauty that masked the harshness of the land. Where water was scarce, mercy even scarcer, and survival meant making choices that haunted you long after the dust settled. Helen Cassidy knelt in the dirt outside the wooden gates of Fort Griffin, her hands raw and bleeding from digging. The shovel lay beside her, its blade caked with red clay and her own desperation. In her arms, wrapped in a faded quilt that had once been her wedding gift, lay her daughter Molly. The child's breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps, each one weaker than the last. The fever had taken hold 3 days ago, burning through Molly's small body like wildfire through dry prairie grass. Helen had tried everything. Cool water compresses, whiskey rubbed on the gums, prayers whispered until her voice went hoarse. But nothing worked. The fort's doctor, a drunk named Peterson, who reeked of cheap gin and failure, had taken one look at the rash spreading across Molly's chest and shaken his head. "Scarlet fever," he had muttered, backing away, as if the words themselves were contagious. "Nothing I can do. Keep her comfortable. Keep her away from the others. And when it's over, burn everything she touched. When it's over." As if Molly were already dead. As if Helen's daughter, her only child, the last piece of her murdered husband she had left in this God-forsaken world, was nothing more than a problem to be disposed of. That was 2 days ago. Since then, no one from the fort had come near them. Not the soldiers, not the other settlers' wives, not even Father Michaels, who preached about Christian charity every Sunday but couldn't be bothered to offer last rites to a dying child. Helen had begged them. She had gone to every door, knocked until her knuckles split, pleaded for medicine, for help, for anything. But Fort Griffin was a hard place, filled with hard people, and compassion was a luxury no one could afford. The commander's wife had actually laughed, a cruel, brittle sound, before slamming the door in Helen's face. "Your husband chose to defend savages," she had hissed through the wooden slats. "Don't expect us to weep for his widow." It was true. 6 months ago, Helen's husband, James Cassidy, had been a scout for the army. A good man, a fair man. He had learned the Comanche tongue, traded with them, even advocated for peaceful negotiations instead of the brutal campaigns that left women and children dead in burned villages. For that he was branded a traitor. For that he was found one morning with his throat cut, his body dumped outside the fort like trash. The army called it a Comanche raid, but Helen knew better. She had seen the boot prints around his corpse. She had recognized the knife work. White men had killed her husband, men who wore the same uniform he once did. The memory of that morning still burned in her mind like a brand. She had woken to shouting, stumbled outside in her nightdress to find a crowd gathered near the supply shed. Through the forest of legs and bodies, she had seen him, James, lying face down in the mud, his scout jacket torn, his hair matted with blood. She had screamed, tried to run to him, but rough hands held her back. Colonel Hutchins, the fort commander, had stepped forward with his boots polished and his face carved from stone. "Comanche attack," he announced to the gathered crowd, his voice carrying over the wind. Cassidy was ambushed last night on patrol. Throat cut, scalped, found him an hour ago, but James hadn't been scalped. Helen had seen his head. His hair was intact, and the wound on his throat was clean, straight, made by a white man's blade, not the curved knives the Comanche favored. She had said as much, screamed it at Hutchins until her voice gave out. But no one listened. No one cared. Within a week, the story was gospel. James Cassidy, the Indian-loving traitor, finally got what he deserved. The fort had given her 3 days to vacate their quarters. 3 days to pack up her life, her memories, her daughter's few belongings. They moved her to a shack on the edge of the settlement, a place with gaps in the walls and a roof that leaked when it rained. The other women stopped speaking to her. The merchants overcharged her for flour and salt. Children threw rocks at Molly and called her half-breed, even though she was as white as any of them. Helen learned quickly that being the widow of a traitor was worse than being a traitor yourself. Now she was alone, shunned, invisible, and her daughter was dying in her arms. Helen looked down at Molly's face. The child's eyes were half open but unseeing, glazed with fever. Her lips, once pink and quick to smile, were cracked and pale. Her small hand, so fragile it looked like bird bones wrapped in skin, clutched weakly at Helen's sleeve. Molly had always been small for her age, delicate, with her father's sandy hair and her mother's green eyes. She loved picking wildflowers. She loved singing. She loved asking questions about everything. Why the sky turned purple at dusk. Why horses had such long faces. Why people couldn't just talk instead of fight. Just last week, before the fever came, Molly had brought Helen a handful of prairie roses, thorns and all. Her fingers pricked and bleeding, but her smile wide as the sky. "Look, Mama," she had said, "they're the same color as your dress. The one you got married in," Helen had cried then, holding those roses like they were made of gold. That dress was long gone, sold for food months ago. But Molly remembered it, remembered the stories Helen told about the wedding day, about dancing with Papa under the stars, about how he had promised to love them both forever. "Mama," Molly whispered now, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Am I going to see Papa?" Helen's throat closed. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced them back. She couldn't break, not now. Not while Molly could still hear her. "Not yet, sweetheart," Helen whispered, kissing her daughter's burning forehead. "Not yet. Mama's going to take care of you, I promise." But even as she spoke, she felt the lie settle heavy in her chest. There was no taking care of this. No miracle coming. The grave she had started digging that morning, just beyond the fort's perimeter where the unwanted were buried, was waiting. She had dug it herself, because no one else would. Dug until her hands bled. Dug until the sun burned her neck raw. Dug until the hole was deep enough for a child. The earth here was hard, full of rocks and roots, and every shovelful had felt like a betrayal. But what choice did she have? She couldn't leave Molly's body to the buzzards. Couldn't let her daughter's final resting place be unmarked, uncared for. She had told herself she was preparing, being practical. But the truth was darker. She was digging her daughter's grave, while Molly still breathed, because she couldn't bear the thought of doing it after. Couldn't bear the thought of lowering that small, still body into the earth with her own hands. At least this way, she could pretend it was for someone else. Some other child. Some other mother's grief. The wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of smoke from the fort's cooking fires. Helen heard laughter from inside the walls, the sounds of life continuing, as if the world wasn't ending just outside the gates. A dog barked. Someone sang a bawdy tune. The normalcy of it all made her want to scream. How could they laugh? How could they eat and drink and carry on while a child died alone in the dirt? But she knew the answer. They could do it because Molly wasn't their child. Because Helen wasn't their problem. Because out here, on the edge of civilization, survival meant learning not to care. Meant building walls around your heart as thick as the timber walls around the fort. A sound broke through her thoughts. Hoofbeats, slow and steady. Coming from the east, Helen looked up, squinting against the setting sun. A lone rider approached, silhouetted against the orange sky. At first she thought it might be a soldier, but as the figure drew closer, her breath caught. The rider sat tall and straight, his long black hair loose and flowing behind him. He wore buckskin leggings, a simple cloth shirt, and a single feather tied into his hair. His face was hard, weathered by sun and wind, marked with the scars of a man who had seen too much violence. Across his back he carried a rifle. At his side a knife, a Comanche. Helen's heart hammered. Her first instinct was fear. Every story she had ever heard about the Comanche flashed through her mind. Raiders, kidnappers, killers, the people who supposedly murdered her husband. But as the rider came closer, something in his eyes stopped her cold. They were not the eyes of a killer. They were weary, sad, and strangely gentle. She had expected rage, perhaps curiosity, maybe contempt, but what she saw was recognition. as if he knew exactly what she was doing here. As if he had done it himself, the man dismounted 20 feet away. He did not draw his weapon, did not speak. He simply stood there, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. His horse, a paint mare with intelligent eyes, stamped once and then stilled. The animal's breath came out in visible puffs in the cooling evening air. Helen held Molly tighter. Her voice came out hoarse and cracked. Stay back, please, just stay back." The man glanced at the grave, then at the child in her arms, then at Helen's bloody hands. Understanding passed across his face like a shadow. He took one step forward. "No," Helen said, her voice breaking. "Don't come closer. She's sick, fever, you'll catch it." The man stopped, but he did not leave. Instead, he crouched low, resting his arms on his knees, making himself smaller, less threatening. He spoke then, and his voice was deep and quiet like distant thunder. "I am called Black Fox," he said in clear, unaccented English. "I will not harm you." Helen blinked in shock. She had expected broken words, harsh sounds. Not this, not fluency, not the calm, measured tone of an educated man. For a moment she forgot her fear, forgot Molly's labored breathing, forgot everything except the strangeness of hearing perfect English from a man who wore the marks of the Comanche. "You speak English," she whispered. "I lived many years among your people," Black Fox said simply. "I was taken as a boy, raised in a mission school in San Antonio, taught your language, your God, your ways. The priests called me Samuel." He paused, and something bitter crossed his face. "Then I chose to return to my own—" Helen didn't know what to say. Her mind was spinning. A Comanche who spoke perfect English, who had lived among whites, who had been given a Christian name and education, who was now here, watching her dig her daughter's grave. Nothing about this made sense. Nothing about this day had made sense since the moment Molly's fever spiked and the world turned cold. She studied him more carefully now. His face was painted with 2 thin lines of ochre across his cheekbones, marks she didn't understand, but that seemed deliberate, ceremonial. His hair, long and black as a raven's wing, was decorated with a single eagle feather and several small beads made from bone. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30, maybe less, but his eyes held the weight of someone much older. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What do you want?" Black Fox's gaze dropped to Molly. His expression softened in a way that made Helen's chest ache. It was the look of a man who understood loss, who had held death in his own hands and knew its weight. "I was scouting," he said. "Saw smoke from the fort. Came to see if there was game nearby. Buffalo have moved south early this year. My people need to know where they've gone." He gestured toward the child. "But I see a different kind of hunt happening here." Helen's tears finally spilled over. "She's dying. My daughter. The fort won't help. No one will help. So I'm doing what I have to do." Her voice cracked, breaking on every word. "I'm preparing to bury her alone." Black Fox said nothing for a long moment. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Somewhere in the distance a hawk cried, its call sharp and lonesome. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky the color of blood. Then Black Fox stood and walked slowly toward her. Helen tensed, every muscle in her body coiled, but he moved past her to the grave. He picked up the shovel, his hands large and scarred, and examined the hole she had dug. Helen's breath hitched. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Black Fox looked at her. His dark eyes were steady, resolute, unafraid. "You should not dig this grave," he said quietly. "Not yet. She's dying," Helen said, her voice rising with panic and grief. "Look at her. She can barely breathe. The fever is killing her. I can feel it. I can feel her slipping away." "Then let me see her," Black Fox said. Helen pulled Molly closer, pressing her daughter's burning body against her chest as if she could shield her from death itself. "No, you'll take her. I will help her," Black Fox interrupted. His voice was firm but not harsh. There was no threat in it, only certainty. "If you let me—" Helen stared at him, at this man who should have been her enemy. This Comanche scout who had every reason to hate her, to leave her to suffer, to let her daughter die as revenge for all the Comanche children killed by white soldiers. But instead, he stood there holding a shovel, asking to help. She thought of James, of his words spoken by firelight on cold nights. "They're not monsters, Helen. They're people. Just people trying to survive like us." "Why?" she whispered, her voice raw. "Why would you help me?" Black Fox's jaw tightened. Pain flickered across his face, brief but unmistakable, like lightning behind clouds. When he spoke again, his voice was low, thick with memory. "Because once I watched my own daughter die of fever. Her name was Little Dove. She was 6 winters old, and no one helped me. No white doctor would come. No medicine was given. The mission priest said it was God's will, that her soul needed saving more than her body." He paused, and Helen saw his hands tighten on the shovel. "I held her as she burned, and I could do nothing. I sang her spirit songs. I prayed to both gods, hers and theirs. But she died anyway, in my arms. While good Christian men turned away," his words hung in the air like smoke. Helen felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but opening. She had been so consumed by her own grief, her own rage at the injustice of it all, that she had forgotten something fundamental. Pain was not owned by one people. Loss did not choose sides. The man standing before her, the enemy she had been taught to fear, understood her suffering in a way no one at the fort ever could. Helen's chest tightened. Fresh tears streamed down her face, hot against her cold cheeks. She looked down at Molly, who was slipping further away with every passing moment, her breath growing shallower, her skin growing greyer. She thought of James, of his belief in peace, in understanding, in the possibility that not all men were enemies. He had died for that belief. And now, in her darkest hour, a Comanche was offering her the very mercy her own people had denied. Slowly trembling, Helen lowered Molly from her chest. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking into pieces. "Please save her!" Black Fox set down the shovel and knelt beside them. He gently pulled back the quilt, and Helen noticed his hands, though rough and scarred, moved with surprising tenderness. He examined Molly's face, her neck, her chest. His expression grew grave. He placed 2 fingers against her throat, feeling for a pulse. Then he leaned close, listening to her breathing, his ear near her mouth. After a moment he sat back, and Helen stopped breathing entirely, waiting for him to pronounce the death sentence she had been expecting all day. "The fever is deep," he said finally, "but she still fights. There is a chance." Hope, painful and sharp as a knife, pierced Helen's chest. "What do you need?" she asked desperately, grabbing his arm. "Tell me." "Anything." Black Fox stood, his movements calm and deliberate. "There is a plant. White settlers call it snake root. We call it tukwii. It grows near water in the shade of cottonwoods. The root, when boiled, brings down fever and clears the lungs. I know a place not far from here, a creek in the hills." He looked toward the eastern horizon, where the last light was fading. "But it will take time, an hour, maybe more. And she must be kept cool while I'm gone. The fever must not rise higher, or she will not survive." "How do I do that?" Helen asked, her voice shaking with urgency and terror. "Tell me how." Black Fox moved to his horse and pulled a water skin from his saddle, along with a cloth bundle tied with rawhide. He returned and poured water onto a piece of clean cotton from the bundle, then handed it to Helen. His fingers brushed hers, warm and steady. "Keep this on her forehead, on her wrists, on her neck where the blood runs close to the skin. Do not let it dry. When it warms, wet it again. I will return as fast as I can." Helen took the cloth with trembling hands, already pressing it to Molly's burning forehead. The child flinched slightly at the coolness, a tiny sign of life that made Helen's heart leap. "What if you don't come back?" Helen asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "What if something happens to you?" Black Fox met her eyes, and in that moment Helen saw something that made her believe him. Not just determination, but honor. The kind of honor her husband had possessed. The kind that didn't break, even when the world demanded it. "I will come back," he said simply, and then he was gone. Mounting his horse in one fluid motion and riding hard toward the eastern hills, his hair streaming behind him, his body low against the mare's neck. Helen watched him disappear into the fading light, her heart pounding, her mind reeling with disbelief and desperate hope. She looked down at Molly, at her daughter's fragile, fading face, and pressed the cool cloth to her burning skin. "Hold on, baby," Helen whispered, her voice breaking as she rocked slightly. "The way she used to when Molly was an infant and couldn't sleep. Just hold on a little longer. Help is coming. I know it sounds crazy, but help is coming." The sun finally disappeared below the horizon. Darkness crept across the land like a rising tide. Stars began to appear, cold and distant, offering no comfort. The temperature dropped quickly, as it always did on the plains, and Helen pulled the quilt tighter around Molly while keeping the wet cloth on her forehead. From inside the fort, she could hear the evening bugle call, signaling the changing of the guard. Life going on, the world turning. Indifferent to her suffering, she re-wet the cloth from the water-skin Black Fox had left, noticing as she did that the leather was decorated with intricate beadwork, patterns she didn't recognize, but that spoke of careful hands and patient work. Someone had made this. Someone had loved the person who carried it. The thought made her throat tight. Molly stirred slightly, a small moan escaping her cracked lips. Helen bent close, brushing damp hair from her daughter's forehead. "I'm here, sweetheart. Mama's right here, and someone's coming to help. A good man, a brave man." She didn't know if that was true. Didn't know if Black Fox would return at all. He could be riding away right now, disappearing into the vast Texas night, leaving her alone with her dying child and her half-dug grave. Why should he help her? What reason did he have to keep his word to a white woman whose people had brought nothing but death and sorrow to his own? But something in his eyes had been real. The pain when he spoke of his daughter, the recognition of her own suffering, and the quiet promise in his voice when he said he would return. Helen clung to that promise now like a drowning woman clings to driftwood. Time passed slowly. Helen couldn't tell if it had been 10 minutes or an hour. The darkness deepened, the wind grew colder, and Molly's breathing became more labored, each inhale a struggle, each exhale a surrender. Helen kept the cloth cool, kept whispering reassurances, kept praying to a God she wasn't sure was listening anymore. And then, just when despair began to sink its teeth into her heart, she heard it, hoofbeats fast and urgent, coming from the east. Helen looked up, her heart in her throat. Through the darkness, she could barely make out the shape of a rider approaching at full gallop. As he drew closer, she recognized the paint mare, recognized the silhouette of Black Fox leaning low over the horse's neck. He pulled up hard beside them, the mare's hooves throwing up clods of dirt, and he was off the horse before it had fully stopped. In his hand, he clutched a bundle of roots, dark and gnarled, still covered in damp earth. "I have it," he said, breathing hard from the ride. "Now we must work quickly." Black Fox moved with the efficiency of a man who had no time to waste. He knelt beside the half-dug grave and used his knife to scrape away the remaining dirt from the roots he'd gathered, revealing pale, fibrous strands that smelled sharp and medicinal. Helen watched, clutching Molly tighter, her heart hammering with a mixture of hope and terror. "I need fire," Black Fox said, glancing around the barren landscape. "A cooking fire. Do you have one in your shelter?" Helen shook her head. "I was put out of the fort. They gave me a shack, but there's no wood left. I burned the last of it yesterday, trying to keep her warm." Black Fox's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he stood and surveyed the area, his eyes scanning the darkness until they settled on a cluster of dried mesquite brush about 50 yards away. Without a word, he strode toward it and began gathering branches, moving quickly but deliberately. Helen watched him work, this Comanche warrior gathering firewood for her dying child, and felt something shift inside her chest. Something that had been frozen since James died began to thaw. Within minutes, Black Fox had assembled a small pile of kindling near where Helen sat. He produced a fire starter from a pouch at his belt, a piece of flint and steel, and within moments had coaxed a flame to life. The fire caught quickly, crackling and spreading warmth into the cold night air. He fed it carefully, building it up until it burned steady and strong. "I need a pot or pan," he said, looking at Helen. something to boil water in. Helen's mind raced. She had left almost everything behind when they forced her out of the fort quarters. But there was one thing. "Wait here," she said, laying Molly gently on the quilt near the fire's warmth. She ran toward her shack, stumbling in the darkness, and burst through the door. Her hands fumbled in the blackness until they found what she was looking for, a battered tin pot. The same one her mother had given her when she married James. She clutched it to her chest and ran back. Black Fox took the pot without comment and filled it halfway with water from his water skin. He set it directly into the flames, wedging it between two larger pieces of wood to keep it stable. Then he took the roots and began cutting them into small pieces with his knife, his movements precise and practiced. The blade flashed in the firelight as he worked. "How do you know this will work?" Helen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She had returned to Molly's side, pressing the cool cloth to her daughter's forehead once again. "My grandmother was a healer," Black Fox said, not looking up from his work. "When I was young, before the missionaries took me, she taught me the old ways. Which plants heal, which plants harm, which plants speak to the spirits." He paused, his hands stilling for a moment. "The white priests tried to beat this knowledge out of me, said it was witchcraft, devil's work. But some things cannot be forgotten, even when you want to forget them." Helen heard the weight in his words, the years of pain compressed into a few sentences. "How old were you?" she asked. "When they took you—" "8 winters," Black Fox said, resuming his cutting. "There was a raid. Not by warriors, by soldiers and priests working together. They came to our camp at dawn when the men were out hunting, took all the children they could catch, said they were saving our souls." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Helen could hear the fury buried beneath it. "They cut my hair, burned my clothes, beat me when I spoke my own language, told me my mother was a heathen and my father was damned. For 6 years I believed them." The water in the pot began to bubble. Black Fox dropped the cut roots into it, and immediately a pungent, earthy smell filled the air. He stirred the mixture with a stick, watching it carefully. Then one day I heard singing, Comanche singing. There was an old woman who worked in the mission kitchen. She had been taken as a girl like me, but she was too old for them to change. She still remembered the songs, the stories. He looked up at Helen, and in the firelight his eyes gleamed. "She reminded me who I was, and I decided I would rather die free than live as someone else." "How did you escape?" Helen asked. "I walked out the front gate," Black Fox said simply. "I was 14. Big enough to be useful for labor, old enough that they had stopped watching me so closely. One morning I simply walked away, walked for 3 days without food or water until I found my people again." He stirred the mixture again, then lifted the pot from the fire using the edge of his knife blade wrapped in a piece of leather. "My mother cried when she saw me. My father said nothing, but that night he gave me back my name." The liquid in the pot had turned dark brown, almost black, and the smell had intensified. Black Fox set it aside to cool slightly, then looked at Molly. "We need to get this into her, but she must drink it while it is still warm. If it cools too much, it will not work as well." Helen nodded, lifting Molly into a more upright position. The child's head lolled against her shoulder, and for a terrible moment Helen thought they were too late. But then Molly coughed, a weak rattling sound, and Helen felt relief flood through her. Still alive. Still fighting. Black Fox dipped his fingers into the pot, testing the temperature. Apparently satisfied, he tore a strip of cloth from his shirt and dipped it into the dark liquid, letting it soak through. Then he brought it to Molly's lips and squeezed gently, allowing drops to fall into her mouth. The child's face contorted at the bitter taste, and she tried to turn away. "I know it tastes bad, little one," Black Fox murmured, his voice surprisingly gentle. "But you must drink. It will help you fight the fire inside you." He repeated the process, patient and methodical, getting small amounts of the medicine into Molly with each attempt. Helen watched his hands, so large and scarred, handling her daughter with such care, and felt tears prick her eyes again. Who was this man? This enemy who had become their only hope? After several minutes, Black Fox sat back. "That is enough for now. Too much at once, and her stomach will reject it." We will give her more in a little while." He looked at Helen. "Now we wait, and we keep her cool. The medicine will make her sweat." "That is good. It means the fever is breaking, but we must not let her get too cold either." Helen nodded, adjusting the quilt around Molly's small frame. The fire crackled beside them, throwing dancing shadows across the ground. In the distance, the fort's walls loomed dark and silent, a barrier between them and the so-called civilized world that had abandoned them. Helen found she didn't care anymore. Let them stay behind their walls. Let them whisper and judge. Out here in the darkness, she had found more humanity in a Comanche warrior than she had in any of those good Christian folk. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know why you're helping us, but thank you." Black Fox fed another branch into the fire, his face unreadable. "I told you why. Because no one helped me when I needed it most." "It's more than that," Helen said. "You could have ridden away. Could have left us to our fate. No one would have blamed you. After everything my people have done to yours, your people," Black Fox interrupted, his voice sharp. "Your people killed my daughter. Did you ride with the soldiers who burned our villages? Did you pull the trigger that took my wife's life?" Helen shook her head, shocked by the sudden intensity in his voice. "Then they are not your people," Black Fox said. "Any more than the Comanche who raid and kill are mine. We do not choose the actions of others. We only choose our own." He looked at her directly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Your husband. He was the scout James Cassidy, yes." Helen's breath caught. "You knew him?" "I met him twice," Black Fox said. "Once, 2 winters ago, at a trading post near the Brazos River. He was there with other soldiers, but he came to our camp alone, unarmed, to speak with our chief. He asked for peace. For a chance to talk instead of fight." Black Fox's expression softened slightly. "Most of the warriors wanted to kill him for his foolishness, but our chief Quana saw something in him, saw that he meant what he said. So we talked. And for a few months there was peace in this part of the territory." Helen felt her chest tighten. James had never told her about that meeting, had never mentioned walking unarmed into a Comanche camp. But it sounded exactly like something he would do, something brave and foolish and noble. "When did you see him the second time?" she asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. Black Fox was quiet for a long moment. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. 3 days before he died," he said finally. "He came to find me. Rode out alone again, searching. When he found me, he was agitated, afraid. He said he had learned of a plan. Some of the soldiers at the fort, they were planning to attack a Comanche camp. Not warriors, women and children. They wanted to provoke a war, to justify more violence." Black Fox's hands clenched. "He asked me to warn my people, to get them to safety. And I did. Because of him, 37 people are still alive today." Helen felt tears streaming down her face. "They killed him for that, for warning you." "I know," Black Fox said. "I heard what happened. Heard they called it a Comanche raid. Heard how they treated you after." He looked at Molly, then back at Helen. "That is why I am here. That is why I stopped. Because I owe your husband a debt. And because I will not let his child die when I have the power to save her." Helen couldn't speak. The weight of it all, James's sacrifice, Black Fox's honor, the terrible injustice of everything that had happened, crashed over her like a wave. She bent over Molly, pressing her face against her daughter's hair, and sobbed. Not quietly, not with dignity, but with the raw, broken sound of a woman who had been holding too much for too long. Black Fox said nothing. He simply kept feeding the fire, keeping the medicine warm, and waiting. After a while, when Helen's tears had subsided into quiet hiccups, he spoke again. "When I lost my daughter, Little Dove, I wanted to die too," he said softly. "I wanted to ride into battle and never come back. Let the soldiers' bullets find me. Let my spirit join hers in the place beyond." He paused. "But my wife stopped me. She said that dying was easy. Living was the hard thing, carrying the pain and still choosing to wake up each morning. still choosing to help others, still choosing to believe that not all of the world is darkness. "Your wife," Helen said, wiping her eyes. "Where is she now?" Black Fox's face grew hard. "Dead, killed in the same raid that took my daughter. Soldiers came to our winter camp 3 years ago. Said they were looking for raiders, but they did not ask questions. They just started shooting. My wife, Laughing Water, she tried to shield our daughter. They shot them both." Helen felt as if someone had driven a knife into her chest. "I'm so sorry." "Do not be sorry," Black Fox said. "Be better. That is all we can do. Be better than the ones who hurt us." They sat in silence for a while, the fire burning between them. Two broken people bound together by loss and by the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they could prevent one more tragedy. Helen checked Molly's forehead. It was still hot, but perhaps not quite as scorching as before. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking. "We should give her more medicine," Black Fox said, as if reading her thoughts. He dipped the cloth into the pot again and brought it to Molly's lips. This time, the child's reaction was less pronounced. She swallowed weakly but didn't fight it. As Black Fox worked, Helen studied him more carefully. In the firelight, she could see details she had missed before. A scar across his left shoulder, barely visible beneath his shirt. Another along his jawline. The way his hands moved, confident but never rushed. The deep lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind. He was not what she had expected. Not the savage the fort's preachers railed against. Not the monster from children's nightmares. He was just a man who had suffered, a man who had lost everything, a man who was still trying to do good in a world that seemed determined to reward only cruelty. "My husband used to say that the biggest lie ever told was that there were good people and bad people," Helen said quietly. "He said there were just people, some trying their best, some giving in to their worst, but all of them capable of both." Black Fox glanced at her. "Your husband was wise?" "He was a fool," Helen said, but there was no bitterness in her voice. Only sadness. A beautiful, brave fool who believed people could change, who believed peace was possible. "And it got him killed, perhaps," Black Fox said. "Or perhaps his foolishness planted seeds that will grow long after he is gone. Perhaps we are sitting here right now because of his belief that enemies could become allies." Helen looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected to see in anyone's eyes ever again. Understanding, not pity, not judgment. Just the simple recognition of one wounded soul seeing another. Molly stirred suddenly, her body convulsing. Helen's heart leapt into her throat. "What's happening?" "Is she—" "The fever is fighting back," Black Fox said calmly. "Hold her steady. Do not let her thrash. She could hurt herself." Helen wrapped her arms around Molly, holding her daughter as gently but firmly as she could, while the child's body shook. It seemed to go on forever, each second stretching into eternity. And Helen found herself praying again, bargaining with God, with fate, with whatever force governed life and death. Please, please, please. And then, as suddenly as it started, the convulsions stopped. Molly went limp in Helen's arms. For one terrible moment, Helen thought it was over, thought her daughter had slipped away. But then she felt it. Warmth, wetness. Molly was sweating profusely, soaking through her clothes, through the quilt, through everything. "The fever," Helen gasped. "It's breaking." Black Fox leaned forward, pressing his hand to Molly's forehead. A small smile, the first Helen had seen from him, touched his lips. "Yes, the medicine is working. The spirits have heard our prayers." Helen laughed, a sound halfway between joy and hysteria. She pulled Molly close, rocking her, kissing her damp hair. "You're going to be okay, baby. You're going to be okay." But Black Fox's expression turned serious again. "She is not out of danger yet. The fever may return, and she is very weak. She will need rest, food, clean water, and she will need to be watched closely for the next 2 days. Helen's relief faltered. 2 days. I can do that. I can watch her. "You cannot do it alone," Black Fox said. "You are exhausted. You have not eaten. You have not slept. If you collapse, who will care for her?" "I'll be fine," Helen insisted, though even as she said it, she felt the weight of exhaustion pulling at her. She hadn't slept in 3 days, hadn't eaten anything but stale bread in just as long. Her hands were shaking, and not just from emotion. Black Fox stood and walked to his horse. From a saddlebag, he pulled out a bundle wrapped in hide. He returned and unwrapped it, revealing strips of dried meat and something that looked like pressed berries mixed with fat. Pemmican, Helen realized. The traveling food of the plains tribes. Eat, he commanded, holding out a piece to her. You are no good to your daughter if you faint from hunger, Helen wanted to argue, but her stomach betrayed her, growling loudly at the sight of food. She took the pemmican and bit into it. It was rich, fatty, and surprisingly good. She ate it quickly, then accepted another piece. Black Fox watched her with approval, then turned his attention back to Molly. I will stay tonight, he said, to make sure the fever does not return. To make sure she continues to improve. Helen looked at him, surprised. You would do that? Stay here? If anyone from the fort sees you, let them see, Black Fox said, his voice hard. Let them come. Let them try to stop me from helping a child. Helen felt something warm bloom in her chest. Not romantic, not that, but something deeper. Gratitude, respect, the knowledge that she was no longer alone in this fight. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Black Fox simply nodded and settled himself on the other side of the fire, cross-legged, his rifle across his lap. He looked comfortable there, at ease in the darkness that Helen had found so terrifying just an hour ago. She realized that he belonged to this land in a way she never would. He was part of it, born from it. While she was just passing through, a temporary visitor in a world that would outlast her by centuries. The night deepened. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The fire burned low, and Black Fox added more wood with the quiet efficiency of a man who had tended 1,000 campfires. Molly slept, her breathing steady now, her fever diminished, though not gone. And Helen, despite her determination to stay awake, felt her eyes growing heavy. Sleep, Black Fox said softly. I will watch over her. I can't, Helen protested weakly. You need to rest, Black Fox interrupted. I give you my word. I will wake you if anything changes. But you must sleep now or you will be useless tomorrow. Helen wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could stay awake, that she had to stay awake. But her body had other ideas. The warmth of the fire, the food in her stomach, the first real hope she had felt in days, all of it combined to pull her down into darkness. Her eyes closed. Her head drooped, and despite her best efforts, she fell asleep with her daughter in her arms and a Comanche warrior standing guard over them both. Hours passed. The fire crackled, the wind whispered, and in the darkness beyond the firelight, Black Fox sat alert and watchful, his eyes scanning the horizon, his hand never far from his rifle. He had made a promise to a dead man, to a dying child, to a desperate mother, and Black Fox did not break his promises. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, Molly's eyes fluttered open for the first time in 2 days. They were weak, unfocused, but they were open, and when she saw her mother sleeping beside her, she smiled. Morning light crept across the Texas plains like a cautious animal, tentative and pale. Helen woke with a start, disoriented, her body stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was or why her back ached so fiercely. Then it all came rushing back. The fever, the grave, Black Fox, the medicine. She sat up quickly, panic seizing her chest, and looked down at Molly. Her daughter lay wrapped in the quilt, eyes closed. But her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm that made Helen want to weep with relief. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched Molly's forehead. Cool. Not cold, but cool. The fever had broken. She woke twice during the night, a voice said from behind her. Helen turned to find Black Fox crouched by the remnants of the fire, feeding it fresh kindling. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, but his posture was alert, watchful. He had stayed awake all night, kept his promise. She asked for water both times. Black Fox continued, not looking at Helen as he worked. I gave her small amounts. Not too much. Her stomach needs to adjust slowly. She also took more of the medicine without fighting. That is a good sign. Helen felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different from the ones she had cried yesterday. These were tears of gratitude, of disbelief, of the overwhelming realization that her daughter might actually survive. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick. "Then don't," Black Fox replied simply. He stood and stretched, his joints popping audibly. "She is not well yet. The danger has passed, but she is very weak. She will need days, maybe weeks, to recover her strength. And she will need proper food, broth, soft bread. Not the hard-tack and beans your fort serves." Helen's stomach sank. "I don't have anything like that." "I barely have anything at all." Black Fox looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Then we will get what she needs." "We," Helen repeated. "You cannot do this alone," Black Fox said, echoing his words from the night before. "And I cannot leave, knowing the child might still die from lack of care. So I will help you for a few days, until she is stronger." Helen shook her head, overwhelmed. "You can't if anyone from the fort sees you. If the soldiers, let them come," Black Fox said, his voice flat and hard. "I am not afraid of men who hide behind walls and call themselves brave." Before Helen could respond, Molly stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then slowly sharpening as they found her mother's face. "Mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible, scratchy from days of fever. Helen's heart nearly burst. She gathered her daughter into her arms, holding her close, but careful not to squeeze too tight. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay." Molly's small hand came up to touch Helen's face, as if checking to make sure she was real. "I had bad dreams," she murmured. "Hot dreams. Scary, I know, sweetheart. But the fever's gone now. You're safe. Mama's got you." Molly's eyes drifted past Helen and settled on Black Fox. For a moment, fear flickered across her young face, the result of years of stories about the savage Indians who stole children in the night. But then something shifted. Maybe it was the gentleness in Black Fox's eyes. Maybe it was the exhaustion in his posture that spoke of a man who had stayed awake all night to protect her. Maybe it was simply that children sometimes see truth more clearly than adults. "Who is he?" Molly asked. Helen hesitated, unsure how to explain. But Black Fox stepped forward and knelt beside them, bringing himself down to Molly's level. "My name is Black Fox," he said softly. "I am a friend of your father's, and I gave you medicine to help you fight the sickness." Molly studied him with the solemn intensity only children possess. "You knew my papa." "I did. He was a good man, a brave man. He saved many lives." "The soldiers say he was bad," Molly whispered. "They say he helped the savages." Black Fox's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "The soldiers say many things. Not all of them are true. Your father helped people, all people. That is never bad." Molly was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then she looked back at her mother. "I'm hungry, Mama." Helen laughed, a sound of pure joy mixed with relief. "That's the best thing you've said in days, baby." Black Fox stood and returned to his horse, digging through his saddlebags. He produced more pemmican and what looked like dried berries. "This is not what she should eat, but it will do until we can get something better," he said, breaking off a small piece of the pemmican and handing it to Helen. "Let her eat slowly. Small bites. Too much at once will make her sick." Helen fed Molly tiny pieces, watching as her daughter chewed slowly, her movements weak but determined. After a few bites, Molly's eyes began to droop again. "I'm tired, Mama," she whispered. "Then sleep, sweetheart. Sleep as much as you need. I'll be right here." Within moments, Molly had drifted off again, her breathing deep and steady. Helen looked up at Black Fox, who was watching them, with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What do we do now?" she asked. Black Fox glanced toward the fort, its wooden walls stark against the morning sky. "First we move. This place is too exposed, too close to people who mean you harm. There is a place I know not far, a canyon with water and shelter. We can take her there." Helen felt a jolt of fear. "Leave, but this is... I can't just... My things..." "What things?" Black Fox asked, his voice not unkind but direct. "The shack they gave you with holes in the walls?" The few possessions they let you keep? They have already taken everything from you that matters. Your husband, your dignity, your place in their community. What more can they take? Helen wanted to argue, but she couldn't. He was right. She had nothing left here but pain and memories. And if she stayed, if she tried to nurse Molly back to health in that freezing shack with no food and no help, her daughter might relapse, might die anyway. At least out there, away from the fort, away from the judgment and the cruelty, they might have a chance. How far is this place? She asked finally. Half a day's ride. Less if we push. But we cannot push, not with the child so weak. It will take us most of the day, moving slowly. I don't have a horse, Helen said. You will ride with the child on mine. I will walk. Helen shook her head. You've been awake all night. You can't walk all day. I have walked farther on less sleep, Black Fox said. We leave soon, before the fort wakes fully, before they send someone to check on you. Helen looked down at Molly, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, then at the half-dug grave she had started yesterday. The grave that would have been her daughter's final resting place. A shudder ran through her. All right, she said quietly. We'll go. They moved quickly but carefully. Black Fox helped Helen onto his paint mare, then handed Molly up to her. The child barely stirred, still deep in the healing sleep her body desperately needed. Helen settled her daughter in front of her, wrapping the quilt around them both. Black Fox gathered his few belongings, rolled the grave-digging shovel into the dirt to hide it, and scattered the remains of the fire. Your things? He asked, gesturing toward the shack. Helen glanced at the structure, its walls leaning, its door hanging crooked on leather hinges. Inside were a few dresses, a Bible her mother had given her, a tin cup, and the memories of 6 months of misery. There's nothing worth going back for, she said. Black Fox nodded and took the mare's reins. Without another word, he began walking east, away from Fort Griffin, away from civilization, toward the wild country that most white settlers feared. Helen looked back once at the fort, its American flag hanging limp in the still morning air, and felt nothing. No regret, no longing. Just a vast emptiness where her old life used to be. They walked in silence for the first hour, the sun climbing higher, burning off the morning chill. The landscape gradually changed, from flat grassland to rolling hills dotted with mesquite and juniper. Black Fox moved with the steady, ground-eating pace of a man who had spent his life walking, never hurrying but never slowing. Helen was grateful for the horse, grateful she didn't have to carry Molly. Her arms still ached from holding her daughter for so long yesterday. Around mid-morning, they came to a shallow creek, its water clear and cold. Black Fox stopped and helped Helen dismount with Molly still in her arms. He led the horse to drink, then filled his water skin. We rest here, he said. Let the child wake naturally. See if she will take more food and water. Helen settled on a flat rock near the creek's edge, Molly stirring slightly in her lap. The sound of running water was soothing, peaceful in a way Helen hadn't experienced in months. She looked around at the landscape, harsh and beautiful in equal measure, and wondered how something so unforgiving could also feel like freedom. This land, she said quietly. It's not what I expected. Black Fox, crouched by the creek refilling his water skin, glanced at her. What did you expect? I don't know. Something more. Hostile, I suppose. The way people talk about it, you'd think it was hell itself. It is hostile, Black Fox said. To those who do not understand it, to those who try to force it to be something it is not. But if you learn its ways, if you respect it, it will sustain you. The whites who come here, they want to make it like the places they left behind. Green, soft, tame. They do not see that it has its own beauty, its own truth. Helen looked at the red rocks, the twisted juniper trees, the vast sky unmarred by buildings or smoke. I think I'm starting to see it, she said. Molly woke then, her eyes clearer than they had been earlier. Where are we? She asked, looking around with confusion. We're going somewhere safe, Helen said, smoothing her daughter's hair. Somewhere you can get better, away from the fort. Molly asked, Yes, baby, away from the fort. Molly was quiet for a moment, then said, "Good. I didn't like it there. Nobody was nice except you." Helen's throat tightened. She had tried so hard to shield Molly from the worst of it, but children noticed everything. Noticed the way other mothers pulled their children away. Noticed the stones thrown. Noticed the words whispered just loud enough to be heard. Black Fox approached with the water skin. "Drink," he said to Molly. "Small sips. Your body needs water." Molly took the water skin with small hands and drank carefully, her eyes never leaving Black Fox's face. After a few sips, she handed it back. "Thank you," she said politely. Black Fox's expression softened. "You have good manners. Your parents taught you well." "Mama says manners don't cost anything," Molly replied. "So there's no reason not to use them." Black Fox smiled, a real smile this time, and Helen felt something shift in the air between them. A barrier coming down, a wall crumbling. "Your mama is very wise," he said. They rested for another half hour, Black Fox feeding the horse, Helen coaxing more food into Molly. The sun climbed higher, the day growing warm. Finally, Black Fox stood and offered his hand to Helen. "We should continue. We want to reach the canyon before dark." The afternoon passed in a haze of heat and steady movement. Black Fox led them through terrain that seemed impassable at first glance, but revealed hidden trails and passages when you knew where to look. He pointed out plants as they walked, naming them in both English and Comanche, explaining which could be eaten, which could heal, which could kill. "This is red root," he said, stopping beside a low-growing plant with deep green leaves. "Good for stomach pain. You boil the root and drink the water. And this," he moved to another plant with narrow leaves and tiny white flowers, "is snake medicine. If bitten, you crush the leaves and apply them to the wound. It will slow the poison." Helen listened, absorbing the information, realizing she was learning things no white person at the fort would ever teach her. Things that might keep them alive out here. "How do you remember it all?" she asked. "My grandmother made me memorize every plant before I could walk more than a mile from camp alone," Black Fox said. "She would test me, point to a plant and make me tell her its name, its use, its season. If I got it wrong, I had to start over." He smiled at the memory. "I hated it then, but those lessons saved my life more than once. Will you teach me?" Helen asked. "Really teach me, I mean. Not just point them out, but make sure I remember." Black Fox looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers. "Why, sir? Because we can't go back," Helen said simply. "Even if Molly gets completely well, we can't return to the fort. They've made that clear. So if we're going to survive out here, I need to know what you know. I need to be able to take care of her." Black Fox nodded slowly. "Then I will teach you, but you must pay attention. Out here, a mistake can cost you your life." "I'll pay attention," Helen promised. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when they finally reached the canyon Black Fox had spoken of. It was hidden, accessible only through a narrow gap between two red rock walls that looked impassable until you were right upon them. Black Fox led the mare through the gap, and suddenly they were in a different world. The canyon opened into a bowl, perhaps 200 yards across, its walls rising 30 feet on all sides, providing shelter from wind and concealment from anyone who didn't know it was there. A spring bubbled from the base of the northern wall, forming a small pool before trickling away through a crack in the rock. Cottonwood trees grew near the water, their leaves rustling in the breeze. Grass, actual green grass, covered much of the canyon floor. "It's beautiful," Helen breathed. "It is sacred," Black Fox said. "To my people, a place of healing. I came here after my wife and daughter died. Spent a month alone deciding whether to live or die." He looked around, his expression distant. "The spirits here are kind. They will help your daughter heal." He helped Helen dismount and immediately set about making camp with the efficiency of long practice. He cleared a spot for a fire, gathered wood, and within minutes had a small blaze going. Then he took a hide container from his pack and began walking toward the spring. "Where are you going?" Helen asked. "To catch dinner," he said. "There are fish in the pool. Not many, but enough. You should make your daughter comfortable." This is where we will stay for a few days." Helen watched him go, then looked down at Molly, who was gazing around the canyon with wide eyes. "It's pretty here, Mama," she said. "It is, baby. And we're safe here. Finally safe." She spread the quilt near the fire and laid Molly down, tucking her in carefully. The child was exhausted again from the day's journey, her brief bursts of wakefulness draining what little strength she had. Within moments, she was asleep again, her face peaceful in a way Helen hadn't seen in far too long. Helen sat beside her daughter and let herself feel, really feel, for the first time since this nightmare began. The fear, the grief, the anger at a world that had taken so much from her, but also the gratitude, the wonder. The strange, impossible fact that a Comanche warrior had saved them when her own people had condemned them to death. Black Fox returned as the sun touched the canyon rim, carrying 3 fish already cleaned and ready to cook. He skewered them on green branches and set them over the fire to roast. The smell made Helen's stomach growl audibly. "When did you last eat?" Black Fox asked. "Yesterday morning," Helen admitted. "The pemmican you gave me. Before that, I don't remember." Black Fox shook his head. "You cannot care for your daughter if you do not care for yourself. Eat. Both of you need to regain your strength." When the fish were cooked, they ate in comfortable silence. The only sounds, the crackling fire and the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. Molly woke long enough to eat a few bites of the tender white meat before falling asleep again. Helen ate until her stomach ached, savoring every morsel. As darkness fell and stars began appearing in the strip of sky visible above the canyon walls, Helen found herself studying Black Fox across the fire. He sat cross-legged, his rifle beside him, his eyes distant. She wondered what he was thinking, whether he regretted helping them, whether he missed his own people. "Can I ask you something?" "Oh," she said finally. Black Fox looked at her, waiting. "Why haven't you returned to your people? Why are you out here alone?" Black Fox was quiet for so long that Helen thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and heavy with old pain. "Because I bring them nothing but trouble now. After my wife and daughter died, I was not myself. I rode against the soldiers, killed men, not in battle but in vengeance, in rage. I became the savage they believed all Comanche to be." He paused. "My chief Quanah, he understood my pain. But he also understood that my actions would bring retaliation against our people. So he asked me to leave. Not forever, but until I found peace again. Until I remembered who I was before the grief consumed me." Helen felt tears prick her eyes. "Have you found peace?" Black Fox looked up at the stars. "I'm looking for it. Every day I am looking." They sat in silence after that. 2 broken people in a hidden canyon, bound together by loss and by the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they could help each other find a way forward. The fire burned low. The stars wheeled overhead, and for the first time in 6 months, Helen Cassidy felt something she had thought was lost forever. She felt hope. 3 days passed in the hidden canyon, and with each sunrise, Molly grew stronger. The transformation was remarkable, like watching a wilted flower slowly unfurl after rain. On the first morning, she could barely sit up without help. By the second day, she was taking short walks around the camp, her small hand clutching Helen's skirt for support. By the third day, she was crouching by the spring, watching minnows dart through the clear water, her laughter echoing off the canyon walls. Helen had never heard a more beautiful sound. Black Fox proved to be a patient teacher true to his word. Each morning, after they broke their fast on whatever he had caught or gathered, he would take Helen on walks through the canyon, pointing out plants, explaining their uses, testing her memory. He taught her to identify yarrow for stopping bleeding, to find wild onions growing in shaded crevices, to recognize the difference between edible and poisonous berries by the shape of their leaves. "The land will feed you if you know how to ask," he said one afternoon as they knelt beside a patch of prickly pear cactus. He showed her how to use 2 sticks to twist off the paddle-shaped segments without getting stuck by spines, then how to burn off the tiny hair-like thorns over the fire. "My people have lived here for generations because we learned to see what others overlook." Helen watched carefully, committing each step to memory. At the fort, they act like this land is empty, like there's nothing here worth having. That is because they are blind, Black Fox said, his voice matter-of-fact rather than bitter. They see only what they brought with them. They do not see what was already here. They are like men who enter a house full of treasures, but complain because there is no gold on the floor. Helen smiled at the comparison. James used to say something similar. He said most people look without seeing. Black Fox glanced at her, something shifting in his expression. He saw, that is why they killed him. The words hung between them, heavy with truth. Helen had spent months trying to convince herself that her husband's death was an accident, a tragic misunderstanding. But she knew better, had always known better. Men like Colonel Hutchins didn't tolerate those who questioned their authority, who suggested there might be another way. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Do you think he knew? Helen asked quietly. That warning your people would cost him his life? Yes, Black Fox said without hesitation. A man like that he would have known. But he did it anyway, because he believed some things are worth dying for. Helen felt tears threaten, but blinked them back. She had cried enough. Now was the time for living, for learning, for becoming strong enough to protect what remained of her family. Teach me more, she said, her voice firm. Now teach me everything. Black Fox studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Come, there is much to learn before winter. In the afternoons, while Molly napped in the shade of the cottonwoods, Black Fox taught Helen other skills. How to build a fire without flint and steel, using a bow drill and dry grass. How to read animal tracks in the dust, distinguishing deer from javelina, coyote from wolf. How to find water by watching where birds flew at dawn and dusk. How to construct a shelter using nothing but branches and grass. Helen's hands, once soft and suited only for needlework and cooking, grew calloused and strong. Her arms ached from the unfamiliar work, but it was a good ache, the kind that spoke of capability rather than suffering. She was learning to survive. More than that, she was learning to thrive. One evening, as the sun painted the canyon walls in shades of orange and purple, Black Fox sat sharpening his knife while Helen prepared their dinner. A rabbit he had snared that morning, along with wild onions and the cactus paddles they had harvested. Molly sat nearby, weaving grass stems together in an attempt to make a basket, her tongue poking out in concentration. You are good with her, Black Fox said suddenly, nodding toward Molly. Helen looked up from the pot she was stirring. She's my daughter. Of course I'm good with her. No, Black Fox said. I mean, you let her try. Let her fail. Let her learn. Many mothers, white and Comanche both, they do everything for their children. Make them weak, but you show her how, then step back. Let her find her own way. Helen watched Molly struggle with the grass, trying to remember the weaving pattern Black Fox had shown her earlier. The basket was lopsided and full of gaps, but Molly was determined to finish it. My mother taught me that, Helen said. She said the greatest gift you can give a child is the confidence to solve their own problems. Your mother was wise, Black Fox said. She was, Helen agreed. She died when I was 16, fever like what Molly had. But there was no one to help her. No medicine that worked. She paused. Sometimes I wonder if that's why I fought so hard for Molly, because I couldn't save my mother. Black Fox was quiet for a moment. We all carry our failures. The question is whether we let them destroy us or teach us. Before Helen could respond, Molly squealed in frustration and threw down her half-finished basket. It's not working, she declared, her lower lip trembling. I can't do it. Helen opened her mouth to encourage her, but Black Fox spoke first. Then don't do it, he said calmly. Molly looked at him, surprised. If it is not working, try something else, or try it differently, or walk away and come back later with fresh eyes. But do not sit there and tell yourself you cannot do something you have not yet finished learning. Molly blinked, processing this. Then she picked up the grass again and stared at it, her brow furrowed. After a moment, she untangled the stems and started over, this time going slower, checking each weave before moving to the next. Black Fox caught Helen's eye and gave her a small nod. That night, After Molly had fallen asleep clutching her completed basket, a crooked, imperfect thing that she treated like the greatest treasure in the world, Helen and Black Fox sat by the fire in companionable silence. The canyon was peaceful, the spring babbling softly, an owl hooting somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight. "I need to leave tomorrow," Black Fox said finally. Helen's heart sank, though she tried not to show it. "For how long?" "A few days. Maybe a week. I need to scout north, see where the buffalo herds have moved. My people depend on that information, and I need to check on them, make sure they are safe." Helen nodded, understanding but unable to suppress the fear that rose in her chest. "We'll be fine here. You've taught me enough to survive. You will be more than fine," Black Fox said. "You are stronger than you think, but there is something I need to tell you before I go. Something you should know." Helen looked at him, sensing the weight of what was coming. "The soldiers at Fort Griffin, they will not forget about you," Black Fox said. "Colonel Hutchins is a prideful man, a dangerous man. He will see your leaving as a challenge, an insult, and men like him cannot abide being defied, especially by a woman. You think he'll come looking for me?" Helen asked. "I think it is possible," Black Fox said carefully. "Not immediately. He has other concerns, but eventually, yes. He may send men, and when he does, you need to be ready." Helen felt cold despite the fire's warmth. "Ready how?" Black Fox reached behind him and pulled out a second knife, smaller than his own but well made, its blade sharp and gleaming in the firelight. He held it out to her. "This was my wife's. She carried it always. For skinning game, for cutting rope, for protection when needed." He paused. "I want you to have it." Helen stared at the knife, understanding the significance of what he was offering. This wasn't just a tool. It was a piece of his past, a connection to the woman he had loved and lost. "I can't take this," she whispered. "You can. You must," Black Fox said firmly. "Out here, a knife can mean the difference between life and death. And more than that, it is a reminder that you are not helpless, that you have the power to protect yourself and your daughter." Slowly, Helen reached out and took the knife. It was lighter than she expected, balanced perfectly for a woman's hand. The handle was wrapped in leather worn smooth by years of use. She could almost feel the presence of the woman who had carried it, this Comanche wife who had loved Black Fox and borne his child. "Thank you," Helen said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll take care of it." "I promise," Black Fox nodded. "I will also leave you my spare water skin and half the pemmican. There are fish in the spring, rabbits that come to drink at dawn and dusk. The snares I showed you how to make, they will work if you place them correctly. You will not starve. What about you?" Helen asked. "What will you eat?" "I have survived on less," Black Fox said with a slight smile. "And I can move faster alone. Hunt more easily. Do not worry about me. Worry about keeping yourself and your daughter safe." They talked late into the night, Black Fox going over everything again, making sure Helen remembered where the edible plants grew, how to tell if meat had spoiled, what to do if Molly's fever returned. He drew maps in the dirt, showing her the safest routes out of the canyon, the places to avoid, the landmarks to remember. Helen absorbed it all, knowing her life and Molly's might depend on these lessons. Finally, when the fire had burned down to coals and the stars were bright overhead, Black Fox stood. "I should sleep. I leave before dawn." Helen stood as well. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, these two people who had been strangers less than a week ago, but who now shared a bond forged in crisis and trust. Then impulsively, Helen stepped forward and embraced him. Black Fox stiffened in surprise, then slowly, carefully returned the embrace. His arms were strong and warm, and for just a moment, Helen let herself feel safe. Truly safe. Not the false security of fort walls and soldiers' guns, but the deeper safety that came from knowing someone would protect you not because they had to, but because they chose to. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "For everything, for saving her, for teaching me, for giving us hope." Black Fox's arms tightened slightly, then released. He stepped back, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "Thank your husband," he said quietly. "He saved my people. This is just me returning the debt, but Helen knew it was more than that. Could see it in his eyes, in the way he looked at Molly, in the patience he showed when teaching Helen skills that most white women would never learn. This wasn't about debt. This was about a man who had lost his own family, finding a way to honor their memory by protecting another. Black Fox turned and walked to his sleeping spot on the far side of the fire. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep. Helen returned to where Molly lay, curled beneath the quilt, and settled beside her daughter. The knife Black Fox had given her resting within easy reach. She didn't sleep for a long time. Instead, she stared up at the stars visible through the gap in the canyon walls and thought about the strange path her life had taken. 6 months ago, she had been a respectable army wife living in modest comfort at Fort Griffin. Now she was an outcast sleeping on the ground in a hidden canyon, learning survival skills from a Comanche warrior. And somehow, impossibly, she was happier than she had been in years. The fort had offered safety, but demanded conformity. Demanded she pretend her husband deserved to die. Demanded she accept her daughter's illness as God's judgment. Demanded she live small and quiet and ashamed. Out here there were no such demands. Out here she could breathe. She woke before dawn to find Black Fox already moving around the camp, gathering his things with quiet efficiency. Molly was still asleep, so Helen rose carefully and went to him. "You're really going," she said, though she had known he would. "I must," Black Fox replied. "But I will return 1 week, maybe less if the scouting goes quickly. You will be safe here if you are careful." "We'll be fine," Helen said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Black Fox studied her face in the pre-dawn light. Then he reached into his pack and pulled out something wrapped in soft deer hide. He handed it to Helen. "Open it." Helen unwrapped the bundle to find a beautifully crafted necklace made from small bones, turquoise beads, and a single eagle feather. It was clearly old, clearly precious. "I can't accept this," she said immediately. "It was my daughter's," Black Fox said. "Little Dove wore it every day. When she died, I kept it. Thought I would bury it with me when my time came. But I think she would want another little girl to have it. Someone who survived when she did not." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Black Fox, give it to your daughter when I return," he said. "Tell her it is a gift from a girl who would have liked to meet her. Tell her to wear it and remember that she is strong, that she is a survivor." Helen couldn't speak, could only nod as she clutched the necklace to her chest. Black Fox touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of comfort and farewell, then turned and walked toward the canyon's narrow entrance. He paused at the gap between the red rock walls and looked back. "Remember what I taught you," he called softly. "Trust your instincts. Protect your daughter. And do not let fear make you foolish." Then he was gone, disappearing into the gray pre-dawn light like a shadow. Helen stood holding the necklace, watching the space where he had been, and felt both gratitude and a deep, aching loneliness. She had grown accustomed to his presence, to his quiet strength, to the way he made her feel capable rather than helpless. Behind her, Molly stirred. "Mama, where's Black Fox?" Helen turned and went to her daughter, kneeling beside her. "He had to go help his people, sweetheart, but he'll be back soon. He promised." Molly's face fell. "But I wanted to show him my basket." "You'll show him when he returns," Helen said, smoothing her daughter's hair. "And look what he left for you." She unwrapped the necklace and held it up. The turquoise beads caught the early morning light, glowing softly. Molly's eyes went wide. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It belonged to his daughter," Helen said. "And he wants you to have it, to remember that you're strong and brave." Molly reached out and touched the feather with one finger, her expression solemn. "What was her name?" "Little Dove," Helen said. "That's a pretty name," Molly said. She looked at her mother. "Can I wear it?" Helen fastened the necklace around Molly's neck. It hung low on her small frame, but she wore it proudly, touching it gently as if it were made of spun glass. "Mama, do you think Little Dove can see me from heaven?" "I think she can," Helen said, her throat tight. "And I think she's glad you're wearing it." They spent the morning doing the things Black Fox had taught them. Helen checked the snares and found one had caught a rabbit. She cleaned it the way Black Fox had shown her, trying not to think about how squeamish she would have been just a week ago. Now it was simply what needed to be done. They gathered more prickly pear paddles, refilled the water skins at the spring, and Helen quizzed Molly on the names of the plants they encountered. "That one's yarrow," Molly said, pointing. "For stopping blood, good. And that one, wild onion," Molly said confidently. "You can eat the whole thing, but it tastes better cooked," Helen smiled. Her daughter was learning too, absorbing everything like a sponge. In a few more weeks, Molly would know as much as Helen did. They would be a team capable and strong. That afternoon, as they rested in the shade of the cottonwoods, Molly asked the question Helen had been dreading. "Mama, are we ever going back to the fort?" Helen was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "No, baby. I don't think we are." "Good," Molly said firmly. "I like it better here. It's prettier, and nobody's mean." Helen pulled her daughter close, kissing the top of her head. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." The days passed slowly without Black Fox. Helen found herself listening for his footsteps, looking toward the canyon entrance, hoping to see his familiar silhouette. She told herself it was just because he had become their protector, their teacher. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. In the short time they had spent together, Black Fox had shown her more respect, more kindness, more genuine care than any man at the fort ever had. On the 5th day, a sound made Helen's blood run cold. Voices, men's voices, coming from somewhere outside the canyon. She grabbed Molly and the knife Black Fox had given her and moved quickly to a sheltered spot behind a large boulder. "Don't make a sound," she whispered urgently. "No matter what happens, stay quiet." Molly nodded, her eyes wide with fear, her hand clutching Little Dove's necklace. The voices grew louder. Helen's heart hammered as she recognized one of them. Colonel Hutchins! The soldiers had found them. Helen's hand tightened around the knife handle as the voices grew closer. She pressed Molly deeper into the shadow of the boulder, her heart pounding so hard she was certain it would give them away. Through a gap in the rocks, she could see the canyon entrance, that narrow passage between the red stone walls that had seemed so protective just moments ago. Now it felt like a trap. 3 men emerged through the gap, and Helen's worst fears materialized before her eyes. Colonel Hutchins led the way, his uniform dusty from travel, his face red from exertion and anger. Behind him came 2 soldiers, both armed with rifles, both scanning the canyon with the practiced wariness of men expecting trouble. One was Sergeant Davies, a thick-necked brute who'd been among the first to spit at Helen after James died. The other she didn't recognize, a younger man with nervous eyes. "Told you I saw smoke yesterday," Davies said, his voice carrying across the canyon. "She's here somewhere, the little traitor's wife." "Spread out," Hutchins ordered. "Check every rock, every shadow." "She can't have gone far with a sick child." Helen's mind raced. The camp was visible from where the soldiers stood, the remains of the morning fire still smoldering, their few possessions scattered around it. There was no hiding the fact that someone had been living here. The only question was, how long before they found her and Molly? Molly whimpered softly, and Helen immediately covered her daughter's mouth with her hand, shaking her head in warning. Molly's eyes were huge with terror, but she nodded understanding. Helen removed her hand slowly, then pulled Molly closer, wrapping her arms around her daughter's small frame. The soldiers moved through the camp, kicking at their belongings, examining the fire pit. Davies picked up the pot Helen had been using to cook and sneered, living like a damn savage now. Probably learned it from that Comanche-loving husband of hers. "Where is she?" Hutchins demanded, his voice sharp. He turned in a slow circle, surveying the canyon walls. "There's no other way out. She has to be here." Helen watched through the gap in the rocks, her breath shallow, her body tense. The boulder she hid behind was large, but not large enough to completely conceal 2 people if the soldiers looked directly at it. And they were getting closer, methodically checking every possible hiding spot. "Maybe she went for water," the younger soldier suggested, nodding toward the spring. "Then we wait," Hutchins said. He settled himself on a rock near the fire pit, his posture relaxed, but his eyes cold and calculating. "She'll come back eventually." They always do, especially with a child. She won't leave without her supplies. Helen's heart sank. They were going to wait, and she and Molly couldn't stay hidden forever. Molly would need water soon, would need to move, to stretch, and eventually one of the soldiers would expand their search and find them. It was inevitable. She looked down at the knife in her hand, Black Fox's gift, his wife's blade. Could she use it? Could she actually fight these men if it came to that? She had never hurt anyone in her life, had been raised to believe that violence was always wrong, that there was always another way. But as she looked at Molly's terrified face, as she thought about what these men had done to James, about how they had let her daughter suffer and die, she felt something shift inside her. Yes, if they tried to take Molly, if they tried to hurt her, Helen would fight. She would use the knife. She would do whatever she had to do to protect her child. The afternoon sun climbed higher, beating down on the canyon. The soldiers settled into their wait, Davies pulling out a flask and taking a long drink before passing it to Hutchins. The younger soldier paced nervously, his rifle held at the ready, jumping at every sound. Helen remained frozen behind the boulder. Molly pressed against her, both of them barely breathing. Time crawled. Helen's legs began to cramp from the awkward position. Sweat dripped down her back despite the shade. Molly shifted slightly, and Helen had to stop her, had to keep her still, even though she knew her daughter must be uncomfortable, must be scared beyond reason. She stroked Molly's hair gently, offering what comfort she could through touch alone. Then, just as Helen was beginning to think they might have to remain hidden until dark, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Another voice. But this one was different. This one was speaking Comanche. Black Fox appeared at the canyon entrance, and Helen's relief was so intense it was almost painful. He looked travel-worn, dusty, but his eyes were sharp and alert as he took in the scene before him. The three soldiers, the ransacked camp, the absence of Helen and Molly. His hand moved slowly toward the rifle on his back. "Well, well," Hutchins said, standing smoothly. His hand went to the pistol at his hip. "Look what wandered in, a savage. You wouldn't happen to know where Mrs. Cassidy is, would you?" Black Fox's expression remained neutral, but Helen could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his body had shifted into a fighting stance. "I do not know this name," he said in heavily accented English, playing ignorant. "Don't play games with me," Hutchins snapped. "We tracked her here, found her camp, and now you show up like you own the place. So I'll ask again, where is the woman and her child? Many people use this canyon," Black Fox said with a shrug. "Perhaps she moved on. Perhaps she was never here." Davies raised his rifle, pointing it at Black Fox's chest. "Or perhaps you're hiding her. Perhaps you and her cooked up some plan together. Wouldn't be the first time a white woman spread her legs for a savage." Helen saw Black Fox's jaw tighten, saw the fury flash in his eyes, quickly suppressed. She knew he was calculating odds, trying to figure out how to handle 3 armed men without getting killed. And she knew, with terrible certainty, that if this came to violence, Black Fox would die trying to protect them. She couldn't let that happen. Before she could talk herself out of it, before fear could paralyze her, Helen stood up from behind the boulder. "I'm here," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "Leave him alone. This has nothing to do with him." All 4 men turned to look at her. Hutchins' face split into a triumphant smile. "There she is. Come on out, Mrs. Cassidy, bring the girl. Time to stop this foolishness and come home. This is my home now," Helen said, stepping into the open, but positioning herself so her body blocked Molly from view. "I'm not going back to that fort. You can't make me." "Actually, I can," Hutchins said, his voice turning cold. "You're still subject to military authority as the widow of an army scout, and I'm ordering you to return to Fort Griffin immediately." "On what grounds?" Helen demanded. "I've committed no crime. I have every right to leave, abandoning your post without permission. Consorting with hostiles," Hutchins gestured toward Black Fox, "endangering a minor child by exposing her to savages and wilderness. Need I go on?" "Those are lies," Helen said, but her voice shook. She knew it didn't matter what was true. Hutchins had the power here. He had the guns, the authority, the backing of the entire fort. What did she have? A knife and a Comanche warrior who was outnumbered 3-1. Last chance, Hutchins said, his hand still on his pistol. Come peacefully or we take you by force. Your choice, Helen's mind raced. If she refused, they would shoot Black Fox. Would probably shoot her too and take Molly anyway, claiming they had no choice, that she had been violent, dangerous. But if she went with them, if she returned to the fort, what kind of life awaited them there? More abuse, more isolation, and eventually they would find a way to take Molly from her entirely. Claim she was an unfit mother, send her daughter to some orphanage or worse. I will go with you, Helen said finally, the words tasting like ash. But only if you let him leave, unharmed. He's done nothing wrong. The savage stays until we're safely away, Hutchins said. Insurance, in case you get any ideas about running again. Black Fox met Helen's eyes across the canyon. She could see the calculation there, the same desperate arithmetic she was doing. How to get out of this alive. How to protect Molly. How to avoid a bloodbath that would solve nothing. Then Black Fox did something Helen didn't expect. He smiled. It was a cold smile, dangerous, and when he spoke, his voice had lost all trace of accent. You know, Colonel, I think you've made a mistake. Hutchins frowned. What? The accent, Black Fox said conversationally. I don't actually need it. I speak English better than half your soldiers. Spent 6 years in a mission school, remember? But it's useful sometimes playing the ignorant savage. People underestimate you. Tell you things they shouldn't, like, for instance, how Colonel Hutchins ordered 3 men to kill James Cassidy and make it look like a Comanche raid. The canyon went silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Hutchins' face had gone white, then red, then purple. You're lying. Am I? Black Fox said. Because I was there that night. Followed Cassidy when he left the fort, worried your men might try something. Watched from the shadows as Sergeant Davies here and 2 others ambushed him. Heard Davies laugh while Cassidy bled out. Heard him say you'd promised them extra pay and whiskey for getting rid of the Indian lover. Davies's face had lost all color. The younger soldier was looking between Davies and Hutchins with growing horror. Sir, is this true? Shut up, Private, Hutchins snapped. Then to Black Fox, even if what you're saying were true, which it's not, who would believe the word of a savage over a decorated army officer? Maybe no one, Black Fox admitted. But I wonder what would happen if word got out. If I rode to every fort, every trading post, every settlement between here and the Mississippi, telling that story. How long before someone started asking questions? How long before one of your men, maybe one who wasn't there, maybe one with a conscience, he glanced meaningfully at the young private, started wondering if it was true? Hutchins' hand moved toward his pistol. Don't, Black Fox said quietly. You shoot me and my people will know. They're watching right now. From the canyon rim. You didn't think I came back alone, did you? It was a bluff. Helen knew it was a bluff, but Hutchins didn't know. His eyes darted up to the canyon walls, searching for hidden watchers. Davies and the private did the same, their rifles swinging nervously. Here's what's going to happen, Black Fox continued, his voice calm and reasonable. You're going to leave. Right now. You're going to ride back to your fort and forget you ever found this place. Forget Helen Cassidy exists. And in return, I'll keep my mouth shut about what really happened to James Cassidy. And if I don't? Hutchins growled. Then I talk, Black Fox said simply. I ride to Fort Concho, to Fort Richardson, to every army post in Texas. I tell them that Colonel Hutchins murders his own men to silence dissent. I tell them about the missing supply records, about the whiskey you sell to traders that was meant for your troops, about the Comanche raids you claim happened but didn't, the ones you used to justify your budget requests. Hutchins's face had gone from purple to ashen. How do you know about... I told you, people underestimate the ignorant savage. They talk around me like I'm not there, like I can't understand. But I understand plenty. Black Fox's eyes were hard as flint. So, what's it going to be, Colonel? Do you leave peacefully, or do I make it my life's mission to destroy yours? The silence stretched out, taut as a bowstring. Helen held her breath. one hand still protectively behind her, touching Molly to make sure her daughter stayed hidden. The standoff seemed to last forever, 4 men and 1 woman frozen in a tableau of violence waiting to happen. Finally, Hutchins stepped back. "This isn't over," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "Yes, it is," Black Fox said. "It's over. Go home. Find someone else to bully. Helen Cassidy is under my protection now. Touch her, and you'll have the entire Comanche nation to answer to." Another bluff. But Hutchins was rattled now, uncertain. He looked at Davies, at the young private, then back at Black Fox. "Move out," he finally ordered, his voice clipped. "We're leaving." "Sir, we can't just—" Davies began. "I said move out, Sergeant," Hutchins snarled. "That's an order." Davies looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to pull his trigger and end this, but years of military discipline won out. He lowered his rifle and followed Hutchins toward the canyon entrance. The young private hesitated, looking at Helen with something that might have been sympathy, might have been shame, then hurried after his commanding officer. They disappeared through the narrow gap between the rock walls. Helen waited, barely breathing, until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Then her legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees, shaking uncontrollably. Black Fox was beside her in an instant. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "No," Helen managed. "We hid. We were behind the boulder the whole time, I thought. I thought they would find us. But they didn't," Black Fox said firmly. He looked past her to where Molly was now peeking out from behind the rock, her face pale, her eyes huge. "Come here, little one. It's safe now." Molly ran to them and threw her arms around Black Fox's neck, sobbing. He held her gently, one hand patting her back in an awkward but sincere gesture of comfort. Over Molly's head, his eyes met Helen's. "Were they really watching?" Helen asked quietly. "Your people from the canyon rim." Black Fox gave her a slight smile. "No, I came back alone. I was going to scout ahead, saw their horses tied outside the canyon entrance, and knew something was wrong. So you bluffed." "I bluffed," Black Fox confirmed. "And it worked. But it won't work forever. Hutchins will recover from his shock, will convince himself that I'm lying, that I have no proof, that no one would believe me anyway. And then he'll come back. With more men, better armed, ready for a fight." Helen felt cold fear settle in her stomach. "Then what do? "We leave," Black Fox said. "Tonight, as soon as it's dark enough to travel, we go north, deeper into Comanche territory, somewhere Hutchins and his men won't dare to follow." "But Molly," Helen protested. "She's still weak. She's not ready for a long journey." "She's stronger than you think," Black Fox said, gently setting Molly down. He looked at the girl seriously. "You can ride a horse?" "Yes," Molly nodded, wiping her tears. "Papa taught me." "Good. Then you ride with your mother. I'll walk ahead, find the path. We'll move slowly, rest often. But we must move." Helen knew he was right. They had no choice. Staying here, they were sitting targets. Moving, at least they had a chance. "Where will we go?" she asked. "To my people," Black Fox said. "To Quana's band. They move with the seasons, but I know where they'll be this time of year. 3 days' travel, maybe 4 with the child. They'll take you in, protect you, teach you to live the way we live." "Will they accept us?" Helen asked. "White woman and child, they'll accept you because I ask them to," Black Fox said, "and because you are the widow of James Cassidy, who saved 37 lives. That carries weight. That earns respect." Helen looked at Molly, who had stopped, crying, and was now listening intently to the conversation. "What do you think, sweetheart? Do you want to go live with Black Fox's people?" Molly touched the necklace around her neck, Little Dove's necklace, and nodded solemnly. "If they were nice to Little Dove, they'll be nice to us." Black Fox's expression softened. He reached out and gently touched the necklace. "Yes, they will be nice to you, I promise." They spent the remaining daylight hours preparing for the journey. Black Fox gathered what supplies they could carry, fashioned a travois from branches. to drag behind his horse for extra supplies, and taught Helen how to pack efficiently for travel. Every movement was purposeful, every decision calculated. There was no room for sentimentality, no time for second thoughts. As the sun set and the canyon filled with shadows, Helen took one last look around the place that had been her refuge for these past days. The spring, where Molly had laughed watching minnows, the cottonwood trees where they had rested in the shade, the fire pit where Black Fox had cooked fish and taught them to survive. It had been a good place, a healing place. But it was time to move on. "Ready?" Black Fox asked, holding the horse's reins. Helen lifted Molly onto the mare's back, then climbed up behind her daughter. She settled Molly against her chest, wrapped the quilt around them both, and took the knife Black Fox had given her, tucking it into her belt where she could reach it quickly if needed. "Ready?" she said. Black Fox nodded and began walking, leading the horse toward the canyon entrance. As they passed through the narrow gap in the rocks, Helen looked back one final time at the hidden canyon. Then she turned her face forward, toward the unknown, toward whatever came next. Behind them, the canyon stood empty and silent. Above them, stars began appearing in the darkening sky. And ahead of them, somewhere in the vast Texas wilderness, a new life waited. 3 years had passed since that desperate flight from the hidden canyon. 3 years since Helen and Molly had ridden into Comanche territory with nothing but hope, and the protection of a warrior who had chosen mercy over hatred. The autumn sun hung low over the rolling plains as Helen stood outside the teepee she now called home, watching the camp come alive with the day's activities. Her hands moved automatically, scraping a deer hide stretched across a wooden frame, her movements practiced and efficient. She wore buckskin now, decorated with simple beadwork, her hair braided in the Comanche style. The woman who had once cowered behind fort walls seemed like a distant memory, someone else entirely. Molly's laughter rang out across the camp, and Helen looked up to see her daughter, now 11 years old, racing through the grass with a group of Comanche children. She was chasing a leather ball, her legs strong and sure, her face glowing with health and happiness. The fever that had nearly killed her was nothing but a bad memory now. The frail, dying child had become a vibrant young girl who spoke Comanche as fluently as English, who could track a rabbit and identify medicinal plants and ride a horse bareback at full gallop. "She has become one of us," a voice said beside Helen. Helen turned to find Black Fox standing there, his arms crossed, watching Molly with an expression of quiet pride. Over the past 3 years, he had become more than their protector. He had become their teacher, their guide, and slowly, carefully, something more. They shared a teepee now, shared their lives, though they had never formalized it with ceremony. It simply was, the way the sun rose and the seasons changed. "She's happy here," Helen said, "happier than she ever was at the fort." "And you?" Black Fox asked, turning to look at her. "Are you happy?" Helen set down her scraping tool and met his gaze. "I never knew I could be this happy. I never knew life could be this simple and this full at the same time." Black Fox's expression softened. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, a gesture that had become familiar between them. "Good, because I need to tell you something." Helen's stomach tightened with sudden worry. "What is it?" "Quanah has asked me to ride south with the scouting party. The buffalo herds are moving earlier this year, and we need to track them before winter comes. I'll be gone for 2 weeks, maybe 3. Helen nodded slowly, trying to hide her disappointment. She had grown accustomed to his presence, to the security of knowing he was nearby. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow at dawn," Black Fox said. "But before I go, there's something I want to give you." He disappeared into their teepee and emerged a moment later, carrying something wrapped in soft leather. He handed it to Helen, and she unwrapped it carefully to reveal a beautifully crafted, though smaller than a warrior's bow, sized perfectly for a woman's hands. The wood was smooth and burnished, decorated with carved symbols she was still learning to read. "I made it for you," Black Fox said. "You've learned to set snares, to gather food, to treat illness, but you should also know how to defend yourself and Molly if needed. While I'm gone, I want you to practice, every day, until the bow feels like an extension of your arm." Helen ran her fingers over the smooth wood, touched beyond words. "It's beautiful." "It's practical," Black Fox corrected, but his eyes were warm. "Beauty is just a bonus." That evening, as the sun set and the camp gathered around cooking fires, Black Fox sat with Helen and Molly, teaching them both the basics of archery. Molly took to it naturally, her young body flexible and quick to learn. Helen struggled more, her muscles unused to the motion. But Black Fox was patient, adjusting her stance, showing her how to breathe, how to aim, how to release. "Don't think," he said softly, standing close behind her, his hands guiding hers. "Feel. The bow knows where the arrow wants to go. You just have to trust it." Helen released the arrow and watched it fly wide of the target, embedding itself in the grass 10 feet away. She laughed, frustrated but not defeated. "I think the bow doesn't trust me yet." "It will," Black Fox said. "Give it time." The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Black Fox prepared to leave. Helen and Molly stood beside him as he checked his horse, his supplies, his weapons. The other scouts were already mounted and waiting, their faces painted for travel, their eyes scanning the horizon. Black Fox turned to Molly first. He knelt down to her level and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Listen to your mother, practice with the bow, and remember everything I've taught you. I'll be back before the first snow." Molly threw her arms around his neck. "Be safe," she whispered. "Always," he promised. Then he stood and faced Helen. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the weight of 3 years of shared life passing between them in silence. Then Black Fox cupped her face in his hands and kissed her forehead, a gesture of tenderness and promise. "Come back to us," Helen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing could keep me away," Black Fox replied. He mounted his horse and rode out with the other scouts, disappearing into the dawn light. Helen stood watching until she could no longer see them, Molly's hand clutched tightly in her own. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Helen threw herself into learning, practicing with the bow, until her shoulders ached, helping the other women prepare for winter, teaching Molly the healing arts that Black Fox had taught her. The Comanche women had accepted her fully now, no longer treating her as an outsider, but as one of their own. They taught her to tan hides properly, to sew with sinew, to preserve meat for the cold months ahead. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Black Fox did not return. Helen tried not to worry, told herself that scouting missions often took longer than expected, that he was fine, that he would come back just as he had promised. But at night, lying alone in the teepee they shared, she felt his absence like a physical ache. On the morning of the 4th week, a scout returned to camp alone, his horse lathered with sweat, his face grim. Helen's heart stopped as she watched him ride straight to Quanah's teepee. She abandoned her work and ran toward them, Molly close behind her. "What's happened?" Helen demanded in Comanche. "Where is Black Fox?" The scout looked at her with tired eyes. "There was a skirmish. Soldiers from Fort Richardson. They attacked our hunting party without warning. Black Fox was injured trying to protect the others." Helen felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Is he alive?" "Yes," the scout said, "but wounded badly. Arrow to the shoulder, infected. The others are bringing him back now, but they're moving slowly. They should arrive by nightfall." Helen didn't wait to hear more. She ran back to her teepee and began gathering supplies, everything she would need to treat a serious wound. Yarrow for bleeding, willow bark for pain and fever, clean bandages. Her hands shook as she worked, but her mind was clear, focused. Black Fox had taught her well. Now she would use that knowledge to save him. As the sun touched the western horizon, the hunting party appeared on the ridge. Helen and half the camp rushed out to meet them. Black Fox was slumped over his horse, barely conscious, his shoulder wrapped in blood-soaked cloth. Two warriors rode on either side of him, holding him steady. Helen's medical training overrode her fear. "Bring him to our teepee, quickly, and someone start heating water, lots of it." They carried Black Fox inside and laid him on the sleeping furs. Helen cut away his shirt and examined the wound. The arrow had been removed, but the gash was deep and angry red with infection. Black Fox's skin was burning with fever. "Mama, what do we do?" Molly asked, her voice shaking. Helen looked at her daughter and saw her own fear reflected back at her. But she also saw strength, determination. "We save him," Helen said firmly. "The way he saved you." For 2 days and nights, Helen and Molly worked without rest. They cleaned the wound with boiled water and yarrow, packed it with a poultice made from crushed roots and herbs, forced willow bark tea between Black Fox's lips when he was conscious enough to swallow. The fever raged, and there were moments when Helen thought she would lose him, when his breathing grew so shallow she had to lean close to feel it. But she refused to give up, refused to let him go. She had lost too much already. She would not lose him too. On the third morning, as dawn light filtered through the teepee's opening, Black Fox's eyes fluttered open. They were clear for the first time in days, focused. He looked at Helen, who sat beside him, exhausted but vigilant, and managed a weak smile. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Helen felt tears stream down her face. "You saved us first. I was just returning the favor." Black Fox's hand found hers, his grip weak but warm. "We're even now—" "No," Helen said, squeezing his hand gently. "We're family now. And family doesn't keep score." Recovery was slow. It took weeks before Black Fox could stand without assistance, longer before he could draw his bow again. But he healed, his body mending under Helen's careful attention and the resilience that had kept him alive through so much loss and hardship. One evening, as winter's first snow began to fall, Black Fox and Helen sat outside their teepee, wrapped in buffalo robes, watching Molly play with the other children. The girl was building a snow fort, her laughter ringing clear and bright in the cold air. "I've been thinking," Black Fox said quietly, "about what you said, about being family." Helen looked at him, waiting. "In my tribe, when a man and woman share a life, share a teepee, raise a child together, they are considered married in all the ways that matter. But I want to ask you properly. I want you to choose this, not just accept it because it happened." He turned to face her fully. "Helen Cassidy, will you be my wife? In the Comanche way, in your way, in whatever way you want. Will you choose this life we've built together?" Helen felt her heart swell. She thought of James, of the love they had shared, and knew he would approve. Knew he would be happy that she had found this unexpected second chance. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I choose this. I choose you. I choose us." They married in the spring, in a simple Comanche ceremony witnessed by the entire band. Molly stood between them, beaming with joy, wearing Little Dove's necklace and a new dress Helen had made, decorated with intricate beadwork that had taken months to complete. And as Helen looked around at the faces of the people who had become her family, at the man who had grabbed a shovel 3 years ago and changed everything, at the daughter who had survived against impossible odds, she felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. They had survived. They had thrived. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. And whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever changes the future brought, they would face them together as family. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.